is human. The terror is real. Hero and the Terror.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the classic 1988 Chuck Norris action thriller Hero and the Terror. The film is directed by William Tamman and it stars, obviously, the legendary Chuck Norris, along with Bryn Thayer, Steve James, Jack O'Halloran and Billy Drago. Right. This film focuses on Chuck Norris's character, Danny O'Brien, who is a police detective who 3 years previously, quite by accident, tracks down a serial killer called Simon Moon, played by Jack O'Halloran, who is a giant of a man who has terrorized a city and murdered 22 women. He tracks Simon Moon down to his hideout, but is ambushed by Simon Moon and almost killed. And quite by accident, he manages to apprehend Simon Moon when Simon Moon kind of collapses and knocks himself out. He is then labelled the hero for bringing down this huge killer, Simon Moon. 3 years later, unfortunately, Simon Moon breaks out of prison and goes on the rampage again. Everybody believes he's dead because he goes off the edge of a cliff in a van, but Chuck Norris knows better, and Simon Moon gets back to his killing ways, and it's up to Chuck Norris to track down his new hideout and take him down. Right, my thoughts on Hero and the Terror. Well, I thought I would visit some Chuck Norris films. I haven't done many, if any, Chuck Norris films on this channel previously. And he is an action legend. Well, he's just a legend. I mean, he's a modern day icon, really, Chuck Norris. And ever since the invention of the internet, his legendary iconic status has just escalated. And he's kind of gone with it, you know what I mean? All the memes that are out there in regards to Chuck Norris are just fabulous. And he has the respect of many, many people in the industry, especially those that make action movies. And he's made some brilliant movies over the years. Yes, you could look at many of them as like action B movies, but for the most part, a lot of his movies have been massively entertaining. And he was on a great streak, certainly in the 80s. Now, this film, Hero and the Terror, has always been a bit of a favourite of mine. Now, normally when you think of Chuck Norris films, you think of Invasion USA, you think of Missing in Action, all that kind of stuff. You don't necessarily think Hero and the Terror. In fact, probably very few people would say that this is certainly one of Chuck Norris's best films. And I understand that, and there are reasons why this film could certainly be criticised. Now, and I will go into that to some degree, because there are some issues here with this film. It's not what you would describe as flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but I've always found it to be quite effective for a few reasons. And I think the two reasons three really, that really make this film work is obviously Chuck Norris. Now, he plays a bit of a toned down version of his macho character that he plays in other films. He's still macho. There's a few scenes where you see him kicking ass as a police officer in this film. But you also see a much more vulnerable side of Chuck Norris in this film. You see him having nightmares about that time he was face-to-face with Simon Moon. And it kind of made him face his own mortality and all this kind of stuff. And he's got genuine fear there of what happened in that confrontation. So it's nice to see a new version of Chuck Norris in this film, a more vulnerable side of Chuck Norris. Not this superhero figure that is made out in many of his movies. And he's in a relationship in this film with a character called Kay, played by Bryn Thayer. And she's heavily pregnant, and she actually she was his therapist. After the Simon Moon incident, he needed therapy, which again shows a vulnerable side of Chuck Norris in this film. And they fell in love. So they're now an item, and she's heavily pregnant. And you actually see a very nice relationship between these two characters. It feels believable, it feels grounded, it feels sometimes action movies, when they go to scenes when they're in a relationship and all that kind of stuff, you kind of yawn or get on with it sort of thing. Well, there's a genuine connection between these two actors stroke characters on screen. And you buy the relationship and you actually enjoy the scenes with them together. I certainly did anyway. And I think another thing that really helps this film is the character of Simon Moon, played by Jack O'Halloran. Now, if he looks or sounds familiar, he's the guy that played, who was in Superman 2. He was the giant in Superman 2, the mute. He plays a very similar character here in a sense of he's mute. He doesn't say anything throughout the whole film, but he's got a really menacing presence in this film. And he feels frightening, threatening, and a real tangible threat for Chuck Norris. And you see that several times in this film. And it really works. And they actually create quite an impressive villain here for Chuck Norris. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's very similar to like creating a tangible threat, for people like Schwarzenegger and Stallone and stuff in the 80s. It was hard to do. And it was certainly hard to do for Chuck Norris, but they managed it here and they did a really, really good job. Now, the film as well, my understanding is it was based on a book, a 1982 book, I think, of the same name, Hero and the Terror. I haven't read the book. I don't know how closely it is, but I do believe that the writer was certainly involved in this film in regards to the writing aspect of it as well. So I think this is a really cool Chuck Norris film. Is it action-packed? No. You have to go into this film not expecting to see Chuck Norris kicking ass and taking names every 10 seconds, every couple of minutes. You know what I mean? There's a couple of action scenes here and there. Most of this film is like him doing his investigations and things like that. And then trying to track down this killer and scenes with his heavily pregnant partner. And then you get these really sinister scenes with Simon Moon. You get this really sinister music playing when Simon Moon ever turns up, this killer. And you see him like just snapping necks on these women that are his victims and things like that. He really believes he's such a threatening character, this Simon Moon. And I do think there's genuinely frightening killer. I think some of the weaknesses here in this film, for me, Steve James. Now, Steve James was in a lot of canon, and this is a canon film. Legendary B-movie makers in the 80s, obviously canon. Now, Steve James did a lot of canon films. I never, even when I was younger, when he was in the American Ninja films and things like that, I just never bought him as an actor. His impressive physique and all that kind of stuff. He's good at the action stuff, but here in this film, he just doesn't fit. And he's not in it a great deal. He plays like, one of Chuck Norris's detective friends on the force. And I think there's one glaring fault with this film in the sense of storyline or plot. Now, there's this big hotel that's been renovated. They've spent $14 million on this abandoned hotel to renovate it, to, spruce up the city, which is ultimately where Simon Moon has found his habitat deep within there, and they kind of built the hotel around him, sort of thing. And Chuck Norris is convinced that he's in there somewhere. Now, if he's so convinced that Simon Moon is in this hotel, why would he leave just one policeman there? And it's Steve James. And the last thing he says to Steve James is, take this seriously. He's here somewhere, basically. And what's the first thing Steve James doesn't do, his character, Robinson? He doesn't take it seriously. He goes jogging around like the cinema room. He takes his radio off and he takes his gun off. Guess who turns up? So there are issues here and there. It's one of those films where there are gaping plot holes here and there. But I think it's an entertaining Chuck Norris film. It's a change of pace compared to his normal action outings in the 80s. And I think it's quite a nice performance as well by Chuck Norris, especially with him showing his vulnerable side. So if you've never seen Hero and the Terror and you are a little bit of a fan of action films from the 80s, and you like serial killer type films, this is definitely worth checking out. Yeah, it's low budgeted stuff, but it's got that 80s charm to it, and at the end of the day, It's got Chuck Norris in it, so why would you not watch it? So yeah, I'm gonna revisit some more Chuck Norris films, and do some classic reviews for them as well. So if you've got any particular Chuck Norris films you would like me to do a review on, fire them in the comments, and I will hopefully get round to reviewing as many as I can. I'm thinking about doing Invasion USA next, so that's one of my personal favourites anyway. So thanks for checking out this video, guys. I will be back with loads more content on the channel very, very soon.